There are moments in history when the line between enemy and ally blurs, when human choice defies the black and white world of war. Imagine this: a German pilot, trained in the Luftwaffe, climbing into the cockpit of an American P-51 Mustang, the very aircraft designed to destroy his own air force. He was not forced, not coerced, he volunteered. At first, it sounds impossible, almost like a rumor whispered across battle lines. But this story is real, and it stayed hidden for more than 3 decades, sealed away in classified files because it unsettled the easy narratives of loyalty and betrayal. This is not just the story of one man, it is the story of a collapsing empire, a war reaching its final, desperate months, and a pilot faced with a choice that would change his life and, in ways no one expected, shape the future of aviation. Today we'll walk together through those decisive moments: the failing engines, the interrogation rooms, the test flights that rewrote what both sides thought they knew. By the end, you may find yourself asking not just what happened, but what you would have done in his place. 1. The shocking defection. A German pilot chooses the enemy. On a cold December morning in 1944, the skies over Europe were filled with fear and exhaustion. By then, most German pilots fought with dwindling fuel, outnumbered 10-1 by Allied aircraft. For many, survival meant little more than one more day in the cockpit. But Hans Lurche, one of Germany's most skilled test pilots, made a decision that would set him apart forever. Instead of gliding back toward German lines after his engine failed, Lurch angled his Messerschmitt toward American-held territory. He landed not as a captive dragged from the wreckage, but as a man stepping into the unknown by choice. It was the kind of decision that made soldiers on both sides question everything they thought they knew about loyalty. Imagine the shock for the American soldiers who approached the crash site. Instead of a desperate enemy, they found a calm pilot who seemed almost relieved. In the chaos of a collapsing Reich, he had chosen not to fight to the bitter end, but to trust his fate to former enemies. The lesson here is simple but profound. Even in war, survival and integrity can sometimes outweigh blind allegiance. And this was only the beginning. To truly understand why Lurche made that choice, we need to step back and see the larger picture, the collapse of the Luftwaffe itself. 2. The Luftwaffe's collapse. Why elite pilots faced the impossible. By late 1944, the mighty Luftwaffe, the air force that once terrified Europe, was crumbling. In the early years of the war, German pilots had dominated the skies over Poland, France, even the Soviet Union. But 5 years of relentless combat had drained the very lifeblood of their force: fuel, aircraft, and most of all, experienced men. The numbers tell the story. While American factories rolled out more than 7,000 aircraft each month, Germany could barely manage a fraction of that. Young recruits were rushed into cockpits after only 100 hours of training, while American pilots often had double or triple that before ever seeing combat. It meant that by the time these inexperienced Germans met P-51 Mustangs or P-47 Thunderbolts in the skies, the outcome was almost predetermined. Even Germany's most advanced machines, the Me-262 jet, the rocket-powered Me-163, were often grounded. Not because they lacked speed, but because they lacked fuel. Pilots with extraordinary skills were left helpless by shortages, forced to fight battles they were destined to lose. And here lies a lesson. No matter how brave or talented an individual may be, the larger system around them often decides the outcome. Lurch, as a test pilot, could see this collapse more clearly than most, which is why, when his own engine gave out, he made a choice that would astonish both friend and foe. Next, we'll step into his world more closely, who Hans Lurche really was, and why his skills made him one of the most valuable pilots of the entire war. 3. Meet Hans Lurch, Germany's secret weapon in the cockpit. Hans Lurch was not just another Luftwaffe pilot. Born in 1914, he grew up in a Germany that was still pretending to honor the Treaty of Versailles, secretly training aviators long before it was allowed. By the mid-1930s, while most young men were dreaming of cars or steady jobs, Lurch was already chasing the skies. He became one of the Reich's most trusted test pilots, the kind of man engineers called upon when a new design was too dangerous for anyone else to fly. Over the years, Lersch tested nearly everything Germany built: Messerschmitt fighters, Focke-Wulf prototypes, even the world's first operational jet, the Me-262. Where frontline aces measured success in kills, Lersch measured it in data, stability, and how far he could push an aircraft before it broke apart. In many ways, he was Germany's answer to what America would later see in Chuck Yeager, a fearless pioneer willing to risk his life in pursuit of flight. His position gave him a unique view. He wasn't blinded by propaganda. He knew where German aviation was brilliant and where it was fatally flawed. That insight would soon make him far more dangerous and valuable than any ace in combat. But fate intervened on a December morning in 1944, when his Messerschmitt engines sputtered into silence. And what came next would not only alter his destiny, but also test the boundaries of loyalty itself. 4. The accident that wasn't: sabotage or secret defection. On December 14, 1944, Lersch climbed into a Messerschmitt Bf 109, the fighter that had carried Germany from the Spanish Civil War all the way to the skies of Russia. But this flight was different. He wasn't heading into battle, he was testing modifications, checking performance, doing the kind of quiet work that kept the Luftwaffe alive a little longer. Then, disaster struck. His engine coughed, sputtered, and died. In that instant, every pilot's nightmare became real. Thousands of feet in the air, no power, and nowhere to go. Was it bad metal, wartime sabotage in the factories, or something far more deliberate? At the time, no one could know. What American intelligence discovered decades later through declassified records was that Lersch himself had tampered with his engine. His accident was in truth a carefully staged defection. He wasn't caught. He volunteered. It's a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, people carve out their own choices. Lersch didn't simply accept the path the war set for him, he created a new one, even at the risk of being branded a traitor. And when his crippled fighter touched down behind American lines, what unfolded was not routine capture. It was the beginning of a relationship that would change everything about how both sides understood the war in the skies. 5. Captured but valued. From prisoner to priceless asset. When American troops reached Lersch's downed Messerschmitt, they expected the usual scene: a shaken pilot, perhaps injured, destined for a prisoner of war camp like thousands before him. Instead, they found something different. Lersch was calm. He surrendered without resistance, almost as if this landing had been planned all along. Standard protocol was clear: interrogate, then ship him off to a POW camp deep inside America. Yet within hours, intelligence officers realized they were dealing with no ordinary pilot. Lersch wasn't just a survivor of countless dogfights. He was the Luftwaffe's chief test pilot, a man who had flown everything from piston-driven fighters to experimental jets. The first interrogation was meant to last 3 days. It stretched to 3 weeks. Every answer he gave opened new doors. Why the Me-260, 2 engines burned out so quickly, how German designers thought about speed versus endurance, why the Focke-Wulf 190 turned tighter but suffered at high altitude. To the Americans, this was not just useful, it was priceless. The lesson here is that sometimes the most valuable capture isn't a weapon or a city, but a mind. And in Lersch, the US had found a mind that could unravel years of German aviation secrets. But what came next was even more astonishing. Instead of just questioning him, the Americans considered something unthinkable: letting a German pilot fly their own warplanes. 6. The impossible decision in Washington. Letting the enemy fly our planes. The reports from Ohio landed on a Pentagon desk like a live grenade. America had in its custody not just a pilot, but the man who had tested almost every advanced German aircraft of the war. The natural course was obvious: keep interrogating, keep extracting information. But one officer, Lieutenant Colonel Harold Watson, himself a respected test pilot, asked a question no one dared before. What if we let Lersch fly our planes? At first, the idea sounded absurd, even reckless. A German prisoner of war climbing into a P-51 Mustang or a P-47 Thunderbolt. It went against every security rule in the book. What if he escaped? What if he gathered intelligence for Berlin? What if news leaked that the US was letting a Nazi pilot fly American aircraft in wartime? The debates stretched for weeks. Some generals called it insanity. Others saw it as an opportunity too valuable to ignore. Finally, after 23 days of wrangling, Washington gave its answer: yes, but under extraordinary conditions. Lurch would remain a POW, guarded at every step. He could only fly aircraft Germany already knew existed. Every flight would be modified to prevent escape. And most importantly, he had to agree voluntarily. The lesson? Sometimes the riskiest choices are the ones that open doors no amount of caution ever could. And when Lurch stepped onto an American runway in March 1945, the world was about to witness a scene that no one on either side could have imagined. Next, we'll watch that moment unfold. The day a German pilot climbed into a P-51 Mustang, the very fighter that had shattered the Luftwaffe. 7. Flying the enemy's best. Lurch versus the Mustang, Thunderbolt, and Lightning. March 15th, 1945. Wright Field, Ohio. The runway shimmered with cold sunlight as mechanics readied a P-51 Mustang for flight. Around them, American pilots gathered in silence, watching as their former enemy walked across the tarmac. For months, they had seen Mustangs rip through German skies. Now, one of the Luftwaffe's finest was about to sit in its cockpit not as prey, but as a pilot. For Lurch, it was like touching a dream. He inspected the machine with quiet reverence: the smooth fuselage, the perfectly maintained engine, the meticulous ground crew. German airfields at the time were filled with shortages, patchwork repairs, and hurried fixes. Here, everything gleamed. It was aviation without desperation. The flight lasted 2 hours. When he landed, the Americans rushed forward, anxious for his verdict. His answer was simple and devastating for his homeland. Your engineers have solved problems we did not even know existed. Over the following weeks, Lurch flew more. The P-47 Thunderbolt, massive and unbreakable, showed him why German fighters so often failed to bring it down. The P-38 Lightning, with twin engines and unmatched endurance, revealed American faith in redundancy, a concept Germany had largely ignored. Each flight became a mirror, showing Lurch not only America's strengths, but also the blind spots of his own nation's designs. The small lesson here is universal. Sometimes the greatest discoveries come not from fighting an enemy, but from learning how they think. But for the men at Wright Field, these test flights were more than data. Something else was happening, something human. Suspicion began to fade, replaced by respect, and soon, by something close to friendship. 8. Friendship in the skies, when enemies became colleagues. At first, every American at Wright Field kept their distance. How could they not? Just months earlier, Hans Lurch had worn the uniform of the enemy, part of a force that had bombed cities, downed comrades, and fought to the death in Europe's skies. To many, he was a reminder of loss. Suspicion hung in the air as tightly as the Ohio winter fog, but the more they worked with him, the harder it became to see him as just the enemy. Lurch approached every briefing with precision, every flight with discipline, every debrief with honesty. He was not there to play games or cling to pride. He was there to fly and to share what he knew. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Watson, the man who had first pushed to let Lurch fly, later admitted his surprise. "I was prepared to deal with a fanatic," he wrote, "but what I found instead was a consummate professional." Over time, the test pilots began to trade more than technical notes. They swapped stories about training, joked about quirks of different aircraft, even debated what aviation might look like in 10 years. For Lurch, this was quietly revolutionary. Nazi propaganda had painted Americans as lazy, undisciplined, soft. Yet here he was, surrounded by men who were skilled, meticulous, and dedicated. The myth was shattered not by bombs or propaganda, but by shared hours in the cockpit and conversations over mess hall tables. The lesson is clear. Human respect has the power to dismantle even the thickest walls of prejudice. But beyond camaraderie, something larger was unfolding. Lurch's collaboration was not an isolated story. It was part of a far greater operation, one that would shape the Cold War itself. 9. From secret pilot to Operation Paperclip. The bigger picture. For decades, the story of Hans Lurch's flights at Wright Field was filed away under layers of secrecy. To the public, it seemed impossible that America would allow an enemy pilot into the cockpit of its most advanced fighters. But the truth is that Lurch was not just a curiosity, he was a test case. The program that gave him access to American aircraft was the seed of something much larger. Operation Paperclip. In the final months of the war, both the United States and the Soviet Union raced to recruit German scientists, engineers, and aviation specialists. The Americans understood that winning World War II was only half the battle. The next struggle, the Cold War, would be won with technology. Paperclip is often remembered for the rocket scientists, men like Werner von Braun who carried America into space. But aviation experts like Lurch were just as critical. More than 200 German specialists were quietly brought to American soil, their knowledge woven into projects that shaped the future of flight. At the same time, the Soviets conducted their own raid, Operation Paperclip, seizing entire teams of German engineers to fuel their jet and missile programs. In many ways, Lurch symbolized the new era. The war had ended, but the competition for knowledge had only begun. His cooperation wasn't just about one man flying American fighters, it was the blueprint for how nations would harness enemy expertise to prepare for the next conflict. And yet, behind the geopolitics, one question lingered. What did this mean for Lurch himself? To some, he was a traitor. To others, a pioneer. As history moved forward, his own legacy would rest on a razor's edge. 10. Legacy and the moral question. Traitor or pioneer? When the guns fell silent in May 1945, Hans Lurch's story did not end. In fact, it grew more complicated. He stayed on at Wright Field, not as a prisoner, but as a civilian test pilot for the U.S. Air Force. For 5 years, he flew American jets at the dawn of the Cold War, his insights woven into designs that would soon face Soviet MiGs over Korea. In 1950, he returned to Germany to help rebuild its shattered aviation industry, but the bond with his American colleagues endured until his death in 1997. So, how should we remember him? Was he a traitor who abandoned his nation at its darkest hour? Or was he a pioneer who chose survival, knowledge, and the future of aviation over blind loyalty to a collapsing regime? History rarely offers simple answers. What Lurch's story shows us is that integrity and professionalism can sometimes matter more than politics, that even in a world divided by war, respect between individuals can transcend borders. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: choices made in desperate times echo far beyond their moment. One German pilot's decision to defect did not just change his fate, it shaped the skies of the Cold War, and it reminds us even today that the enemy of yesterday can become the teacher or even the partner of tomorrow. So I'll leave you with a question. If you were in Lurch's cockpit, engines silent, the war collapsing, and the choice between loyalty and survival in your hands, what would you have done? Hit subscribe now because the next secret from World War II will be even harder to believe. We've walked through the extraordinary journey of Hans Lurch, a man who crossed the line between enemy and ally, not through force, but through choice. His defection was shocking, his test flights groundbreaking, and his legacy complicated. Was he a traitor to Germany, or a pioneer who embraced a higher loyalty to aviation itself? Perhaps the answer lies somewhere in between. What stands out most is the reminder that history is never just about nations, battles, or numbers, it's about people. People making impossible choices in impossible times. Lurch's story challenges us to rethink the rigid lines we often draw between good and evil, loyalty and betrayal. And it invites us to imagine what courage might look like when the world is collapsing around us. For America, his insights helped shape aviation in the years to come. For us today, his story offers something even greater: proof that respect and shared purpose can sometimes overcome even the bitterest divides. If this story made you see World War II in a new light, then stay with us. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you won't miss the next untold chapter of history. Because sometimes, the past still has secrets left to teach us. Hit subscribe now because the next secret from World War II will be even harder to believe.